Well, let's take a closer look at those U.S.-China trade tensions. I'm joined by Haiyan Wang, Managing Partner at the China-India Institute. Welcome back to the show.
Glad to be here.
Now, as we've been reporting, it seemed like things were going well. We were seeing a lot of positive momentum before this sudden turn. What do you think led to this change, this escalation now, to raising tariffs from 10 to 25%?
I think that partially it's also predicted that this long-term, rivalry and then this twist, this tussles is not a short term. I think particularly when we come down to the final stage of negotiations, the 11th round, and some of the toughest issues are emerging. And then I wouldn't expect a magical resolution very soon.
So being that Friday is coming, but the trade talks are still ongoing, what are the expectations? What is China making of this?
I wouldn't set the expectations to be very high. One of the reasons is from a timing standpoint, and I think that I wouldn't be surprised that Trump figured that this negotiation could well go to next year, and because the voters in the U.S. has very short memories. Whatever breakthroughs you make now, and then by next year, when the election is coming closer, the voters would have already forgotten what Trump has achieved. He probably wants to drag it on so that he could claim a bigger victory when it really matters, when voters go to the poll to vote. And I also think that from the China side, some of these structural reform issues are really internal issues. These are not to be pressured by the U.S. timetable. Economic reform, structural change, it is midterm, long term. It's something that in China's policy, and I think that it's very much internal economic and political issues.
And you raise a very interesting point. I mean, these are the world's two biggest economies. The idea that you can sort of snap your fingers and think you can kind of just sort it out by Friday by kind of making this threat. A lot of people are wondering, especially trade partners, what do you think they're making of this?
I think that by now everybody have set their expectations bar realistically and low, and they understand that Trump can be somewhat unpredictable. And as everybody has seen in terms of his negotiations with Europe and with Canada and Mexico, one thing is really worrisome is this whole backtrack from a multilateral platforms using WTO to resolve. Now suddenly it becomes bilateral and big deals. Even if making breakthroughs, it's going to cause Japan, Europe, and the rest of the world worrying about the validity of a platform like WTO.
And what do you think in terms of negotiating styles when you have this kind of threat of tariffs, as you know the Chinese delegation is now coming to try and continue these talks?
From a negotiation standpoint, both countries' leaders are very strong men, and then I think that the ultimate decisions would lie in the hands of President Xi and President Trump. Until the black ink is printed on the table, it is very hard to predict. But at this point, I don't expect anything magical is going to get resolved, and then we could all claim victory by the end of this week.
Now, I'm sure that this rift certainly isn't good news for a lot of consumers. We saw that an organization called Tariffs Hurt the Heartland, which is a campaign made up of 150 of America's biggest trade organizations, including retail, tech, manufacturing, agriculture. They said, to be clear, tariffs are taxes that Americans pay, and this sudden increase with little notice will only punish U.S. farmers, businesses, and consumers. Just how costly is it to keep dragging this on for both countries?
Well, certain sectors were hurt more so than others. Consumers will pay more, and it's like paying an extra $500, say, on an average family. Now, I think that Trump is also timing it at this point of time where unemployment is at the lowest point, inflation is just under 2%, and economic growth is above 3%. U.S. administration might be figuring that they have some buffers, and there's no urgency, and financial markets that we've seen that have stabilized. So some sectors will claim that they hurt more than others, but that at this point won't influence won't put too much pressure in terms of how the trade negotiations will will end up going.
Certainly a lot at stake, and I'm sure a lot of people wondering how this will all plan out. Always good to have you on. Haiyan Wang there, Managing Partner at the China-India Institute.